Here we are at part 2. And just at the end of part 1, I had kind of given a defense of the Jewish laws in Judaism on 2 bases. One is that as Catholics we know they come from God, and that they might in fact have been intended by God to in part keep the Jews separate for 2,000 years until the incarnation took place. And I kind of said, well, we should respect those laws. But we know that Jesus had some rather harsh things to say about those laws. And I want to respect that too. And it gets back to what I talked about on the last show, which is the Talmud, essentially, the Jewish oral tradition. Because what happened was that the laws in the Old Testament themselves are rather vague, unclear, don't give enough information to know exactly how they should be followed. For instance, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. But what's that mean? What do you have to do on the Sabbath? What are you not allowed to do on the Sabbath? Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy isn't a very elaborate, owner's manual. So the Jews were faced with the problem of what are we allowed to do on the Sabbath and what aren't we allowed to do on the Sabbath. So the rabbinic tradition came up with an oral tradition that elaborated on the laws in the Old Testament, and from their point of view told the Jews what God wanted in those laws, but from Jesus' point of view went far beyond those laws and came up with human precepts that they claimed came from God but came from human beings. And for instance, here's a passage from Mark 7. Don't blame me for don't accuse me of being anti-Semitic. These are Jesus' words. Jesus said to the Pharisees, "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men.'" In other words, teaching as God's law the precepts of men. These were the rabbinic interpretations of the Old Testament laws. So that, for instance, I'm trying to think of a good example. It may not be the best example. Well, I'll give you one. The Old Testament says you're not allowed to boil a kid in its mother's milk. And so the rabbis interpreted this to mean you're not allowed to eat milk and meat at the same meal. You're not allowed to use dishes that for meat if they have been polluted by the presence of milk on that dish, and so forth and so on. Sabbath, you have to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. But if you go to a apartment building in New York City nowadays that has a number of Orthodox Jews, they will have what's known as a Shabbos elevator or a Sabbath elevator, where the elevator stops at every floor because the Jewish tenants aren't allowed to push the button, for 412 to get to their floor if it's the Sabbath, because that would be violating the Sabbath. That would be doing work on the Sabbath. Now, obviously, that's not in the Old Testament. God didn't say what I mean by keeping the Sabbath holy is don't push an elevator button. So anyway, those are examples of rabbinic laws that, from the point of view of the rabbis, are actually explanations of Old Testament laws, but from the point of view of Jesus are certainly what he says, teaching as God's law, the precepts of men, teaching as doctrines, divine teaching, the precepts of men. He goes on to say, "You leave the commandment of God and hold fast the tradition of men. You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition." And then he goes on with examples of violations of God's law wrapped up in a claim that their rabbinic law replaces the God's law. So when I make a defense of the Jewish laws as coming from God, to be fair and to not be too kind of pro-Jewish, I have to say one must carefully discriminate between laws that are actually in the Old Testament and laws that are coming from the rabbis. However, there are a lot of very strange laws still coming straight from the Old Testament, such as kashrut, the animals you're allowed to eat and the animals you're not allowed to eat. The fact that you're allowed to eat cows, but you're not allowed to eat horses, because they don't have cloven hoofs, and you're not allowed to eat pigs because they don't chew their cud, unless I have that backwards. You're allowed to eat salmon, but you're not allowed to eat lobster. Those things come straight from the Old Testament, so those you can't blame on rabbinic interpretation. Those are word for word there in the Old Testament. The fact that you can't mix two kinds of fabric in your clothing, I think it's linen and wool, but I'm not exactly sure. So you can't make a piece of clothing out of those two threads interwoven, is there in the Old Testament. I'm trying to think of other very peculiar ones. The fact that you become ritually unclean if you touch a woman during her menstruation is straight from the Old Testament. I used that example in the first half of today's video as an unattractive behavior producing law. So anyway, so it's not like all of the weird, obnoxious laws were rabbinic laws made up by rabbis or part of the oral tradition, part of the Talmud, but many of them come straight from the Old Testament. And again, in this business of having full disclosure, I've been a little fast and loose talking about the oral tradition because I think we understand that that the laws in the Talmud, I'll back up. I'll just use the word oral tradition. The laws in the oral tradition come from rabbis. They come from men. However, if you are a very orthodox, strictly observant Jew, you think that they come either from being given orally to Moses on Mount Sinai direct by God, or a divinely inspired interpretation by a rabbi. So you actually do you don't think that the laws in the oral tradition are man-made. You think they're God-made, even though they're not directly from the Old Testament. This has to do with that whole complex issue about the Talmud. I talked a lot more about that, I think, last time. So anyway, let me just look at okay. Yeah, so my computer's acting up. There's no question about it. But I don't want to mess with it in real time anymore. I already imposed on your patience too much. So anyway, okay, so that's, where was I? Okay, so that's my explanation, actually, of Judaism being phase one, Catholic Church being phase two, the laws having to do with being phase one, the restriction to an ethnic group having to do with being phase one, and the weirdness of Jews not caring so much about whether a Jew has faith in God as long as they maintain their ethnic identity. I went through all of that. Now, okay, so why did God choose the Jews? I did say that part of it was random. He had to choose somebody. Part of it is actually very interesting. I don't have the quote in front of me. Ezekiel? One of the prophets, I'm pretty sure it's Ezekiel, says that God chose the Jews precisely because they were the most insignificant and worthless people. He says, I see how much I can remember. Your mother was a Hittite and your father was an Amorite, and you were cast off after birth. And when I saw you weltering in your blood, I came along. This is the Lord says to Jerusalem, or the Lord says to Israel, your mother was a Hittite and your father was an Amorite, and you were cast off after birth and left weltering in your blood as obviously an unwanted infant. And when I saw you weltering there in your blood, I picked you up and I said, live, and I washed you off and I clothed you with fine garments and I anointed you with perfumes and, adorned you with jewels and raised you up to great beauty because of the beauty that I have given you, says the Lord. So basically, I think it's Ezekiel 2, but I don't want to take time to look. He basically said, look, I chose you precisely because you were so insignificant so that everyone would know that any, glamour or beauty or dignity that adheres to you comes from me and not comes from you. And as Catholics, we know that's normally the system that God uses, right? For instance, St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, who received the Sacred Heart apparitions. At one point she asked Jesus, why did you choose me? Why did you pick me for this great honor? And he says to her, that's very simple. If I could have found anyone else more worthless and insignificant than you, I would have chosen her instead. So we know this with the Fatima children. You know, why does God choose people like Saint Bernadette of Lourdes? Saint Bernadette said, I was the most ignorant of creatures. And the Fatima children for these special honors is precisely because when it happens to them, you can't actually even give them credit for making it up or for being special because they're so insignificant. So that's one reason God chose the Jews. But another reason God chose the Jews is given in the story in Genesis 22, which is the beginning of Judaism, the true beginning of Judaism. You know the story that Abraham was born among the Chaldeans, and God revealed himself to him and said, leave your people, leave your land, go to a land that I will show you, and I'll make you the father of a great nation. And so Abraham left with his wife Sarah and went to the promised land, which was Israel, and waited 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 until he was about 100 years old for this child of promise, through whom God would make him a great nation. And he had given up. He had given up so badly that he had another child with a bondswoman that ended up with another story that I don't have time to tell now, but it's Ishmael, who the Muslims claim to trace their descent from. So Abraham made a big problem for his progeny by not waiting for God's child of promise. But anyway, back to the main line. So then finally, when he's about 100 years old and his wife Sarah is 80 and long past childbearing, God finally gives him the child of promise, who is Isaac. This is why, of course, the thumbnail for the show was Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. Because as soon as Isaac is, nobody knows, a young lad, I think of it as about 13, but Bible scholars, are all over the map with that. But in any case, he had to be at least on the order of 13, because as soon as he was that age, as soon as he was a young lad, God called to Abraham and said, now that you have waited, 100 years for the child of promise, through whom I would make you a great nation, I want you to sacrifice him to me. And so here is the passage in Genesis 22. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. Abraham replied, here I am. God said, take your son, your only beloved son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering upon one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning. Notice he didn't delay. He rose early in the next morning to fulfill God's word. Maybe to sneak away before Sarah got up so he wouldn't have to explain to Isaac's mother what he was doing. Just my conjecture there. But anyway, he rose early the next morning, saddled his ass, took his son Isaac and cut the wood for the burnt offering, arose and went to the place of which God had told him. And then Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and took in his hand the fire and the knife, and they both went up together up the mountain. I'm reading from Genesis 22. I'm skipping verses in the interest of time, but I'm really reading what's there. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it on Isaac his son, and took it in his hand, the fire and the knife, and they both went up the mountain together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father. Abraham replied, here I am, son. Isaac said, I see the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? The Jews were never stupid people, right? Abraham said, God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering myself. So they both went together up the mountain. When they had come to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. Then Abraham put forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham, do not lay your hand on the lad, or do anything to him, For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only beloved son, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will indeed bless you, and I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven and the sands which are on the seashore, and by your descendants shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." Okay, so I'll stop there. Now that oath that God made, "By your descendants shall all the nations of the earth be blessed," has always been understood to be the fundamental promise that God made to send the Messiah through the seed of Abraham. It was Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac on Mount Moriah that earned the Jews, earned Abraham's descendants the honor of hosting the Messiah when he came. Remember when they're climbing up the mountain, Isaac says to Abraham, "Look, Dad, I see the fire and I see the wood, I see the fire, I see the knife, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" What's Abraham say? He says, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." He was speaking prophetically, far more deeply than he could know, because God himself did provide the lamb for the true burnt offering, for the true sacrifice, which of course was Jesus. The entire story of Abraham taking his only beloved son, let's look at the picture that's painted. This is why there's so many Catholic paintings of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. I picked about a dozen at random for that opening of the show, but it was a common theme. If you go to the Basilica in St. Louis, there is a very beautiful, the ceiling. Half of it is Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, and the other half is Jesus on Calvary, because it was so understood in the Catholic faith that Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac was a precursor, was a foreshadowing, was a prefigurement of God's sacrifice of Jesus. Let's look at the picture. Abraham takes his only beloved son Isaac, whom he loves, it says, whom he loves, right? And takes him to Mount Moriah, the mountain that God had picked out for him, and lays the wood for Isaac's sacrifice on his shoulders, and takes him up the mountain, and binds him to the wood, and takes the knife to slay his son Isaac. Now, let me throw in a kicker here, one of those kaboom moments, which is, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. That mountain that was called Mount Moriah in the days of the Old Testament, well, golly bee, it had a different name 2,000 years later. It was called Mount Golgotha. And in fact, Mount Moriah and Mount Golgotha are the very same mountaintop. And if you go to Jerusalem today, you can go to the stone, the rock on which Abraham bound Isaac. You've heard of the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock is called the Dome of the Rock because it's over the rock. And the rock is the rock where Abraham bound Isaac. And you can walk not even a half a mile down that same mountain ridge. It's actually about 800 yards to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus was crucified, where the cross was planted. And you can actually stick your hand in the hole in the rock that was cut out to hold the foot of the cross. It's about 12 inches by 12 inches. It's where the cross was planted for the crucifixion. Mount Moriah and Mount Golgotha were one in the same place. Isn't that incredibly beautiful? That God made the foreshadowing of the crucifixion, which was Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, take place in the same place where the crucifixion took place. He made the whole story parallel the story of the crucifixion. And it was Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac, which was reciprocated by God by choosing the Jews for the true sacrificial offering, which was Jesus 2,000 years later. I hope this is coming across. Let me see yeah. Now, of course, that's why Abraham prophetically said, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son, because in fact, Isaac wasn't the point of the burnt offering, wasn't the point of the sacrifice. Jesus was the point of the sacrifice. Jesus was the true sacrifice. Now, Abraham finds himself at the top there, with Isaac being told, don't sacrifice Isaac. So he takes the ram caught by its horn in a thicket and substitutes the ram for Isaac as a temporary placeholder. That lamb you can think of as the first Jewish sacrificial lamb. Every Jewish sacrificial lamb, from Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac to Jesus on Calvary, was a placeholder for the true Lamb of sacrifice, who would be the fulfillment of Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac, who would be Jesus 2,000 years later in the same place, in the same way. As Abraham's son Isaac placed the wood for his shoulders, for his sacrifice, on his own shoulders, and led him up the very same mountain, bound him to the wood that he had carried up that mountain on his shoulders to offer him a sacrifice. God laid the wood for Jesus, his only beloved son sacrifice, on Jesus' shoulders, led him up the very same mountain, bound him to the wood, nailed him to the wood for the sacrifice. As a matter of fact, the name for Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac in Judaism is the binding, right? The binding, him being bound to the wood like Jesus was nailed to the cross. Judaism becomes very beautiful when seen through the eyes of the Catholic Church. And Catholicism, you see a whole layer of beauty of the Catholic faith when it's illumined by the Jewish precedent. So, just to put the icing on the cake, as I said, it was this act which got the Jews the favor, the offspring of Abraham the favor, that through that offspring the Messiah would come. This was understood in a mysterious way in Judaism, not overtly, but it was from the first days of Christianity, from the Apostolic Fathers. It was very vividly understood, and hence all of that art. Now, there was one other very beautiful thing I want to point out about this parallel. Two other beautiful things I want to point out about this parallel. Maybe only one, because I haven't prepared by bringing my shofar here. Let me see if I can see it back there. Maybe I'll run off and get my shofar for that part. Anyway, which is the following, which is... I have been making a defense of Judaism in some sense in this show. I'm not trying to overplay it. I don't really want to make a defense of Judaism. Now, the reason why a defense of Judaism, in a sense, does not make sense is because Judaism lost its salvific sacramental value 2,000 years ago when Jesus was crucified. We know that. We know that throughout Christianity. We certainly know that from the letter to the Hebrews. It deals very explicitly with the fact that sacramental Judaism, that's the theme of the letter to the Hebrews. And note that the letter to the Hebrews is called the letter to the Hebrews because it was written for the Jews. So the author of the letter to the Hebrews wanted to make very clear that the Jewish sacramental system, salvation through sacramental Judaism, was eradicated, abrogated, annulled with the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, which was the fulfillment of the promise of Judaism. No ifs, ands, or buts. However, so what we have today, what we have since the 2nd century AD, after Christ, about 130 years after Christ, what we have today is known as Rabbinic Judaism. the Judaism that God gave the Jews in the Old Testament is usually called Temple Judaism. One could call it Old Testament Judaism. It's Temple Judaism because it required the temple in Jerusalem in order for a Jew to perform the Judaism, because that Judaism was all around animal sacrifice, and animal sacrifice required the temple, which was destroyed around 70 AD, never to be rebuilt. So Temple Judaism ceased to exist at 70 AD. The Jews tried to kind of imagine that the temple would be rebuilt for 50 or 60 years, but they eventually gave up around 130 AD, and they scratched the idea of ever again, until the Messiah comes, being able to perform Temple Judaism or Old Testament Judaism, excuse me. So they replaced it with what's known as Rabbinic Judaism. Now, the story gets a little bit more complicated than anyone but me is interested in, but the Jews had been exiled from Jerusalem around 130 AD because they had staged a second revolt. The first revolt in 70 AD was disastrous, but apparently wasn't disastrous enough for them not to stage a second revolt. They actually staged a second revolt. It's called the Bar Kokhba Revolt, because they were following a false Messiah. In a later show, I never get anywhere if I keep going down these rabbit holes. A later show, I want to talk about the Bar Kokhba Revolt, maybe the next part of this one. I'll make a note of that. Anyway, after that second failed revolt in around 130 AD, the Jews were banned from even being in Jerusalem under pain of death, or within sight of Jerusalem. I don't remember the exact distance. So the rabbis had to regather. They regathered in another town, not too far from Jerusalem, but towards the coast, which in Hebrew is called Yavna, and in Judaism was known as in Judaism is known as Yavna. That's the Hebrew word. In Christianity, it's called Jamnia. So it's referred to as the Council of Jamnia. It wasn't really a council. I'm distracting myself because somewhere I had a picture all lined up to put on the screen, but I lost it. Anyway, it's the Council of Jamnia wasn't really a council. It wasn't a formal council, but it was the place where all of the authoritative rabbis went to when they left Jerusalem in this period around 130 AD. And it's where Rabbinic Judaism was developed. And out of that, then, the Talmud was written down. And so it's really the birthplace of Rabbinic Judaism. There's another controversy about the Council of Javna or Jamnia that I'm not really engaging in, which is whether or not the Jewish canon was really developed at the Council of Jamnia. Now, most Catholic Bible scholars today say it wasn't. I'm fine with that. But what they say is there was no Council of Jamnia. But what they're really saying is the canon wasn't established there. There certainly was an assembly of rabbis at Jamnia that basically wrestled with the issue of how can we continue Judaism after we can't return to Jerusalem and we can't resume the temple sacrifice. So anyway, there I was at the Council of Jamnia, and it was at the Council of Jamnia that they redefined Judaism into Rabbinic Judaism, and they said that almsgiving, fasting, and prayer can substitute for animal sacrifice, and that's the Judaism we have today. We don't have animal sacrifice in Judaism, not even among the ultra-Orthodox Jews. They have replaced it with the rules in the Talmud that involve almsgiving, fasting, and prayer. However, I do have this incredibly neat quote here somewhere that I do want to find if I can, which is, of course, Jewish theology had to deal with the issue, the question, of how can sins be remitted in the absence of animal sacrifice. And I can't believe that I never have the right quote, because I never know where my mind is going to go on these shows. So, here it is. Okay. So anyway, in the 13th century, one of the very, very leading rabbis, known as Rashba, Rabbi Solomon ben Abraham, wrote a work in which he explicitly addressed this question: Where does the merit come from? Where does the grace come from that the Jews need to remit sins in the absence of animal sacrifice? And what was the answer? It was through the merit that Abraham gained by his willingness to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah, that the Jews have the grace available to them for the remission of sins. So do you see what's so neat about this? It's that Judaism itself is saying that after the crucifixion of Christ, the grace, the merit for the remission of sins came from Jesus' sacrifice on Mount Calvary. Only they are looking at the prefigurement picture of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac on Mount Calvary. But it's the same event spiritually, right? It was simply a foreshadowing, a picture in advance of Jesus' sacrifice. So that is the neat little thing that I wanted to point out. As long as I'm on that stream, I'll point out one other neat little thing, which is the Talmud asks, after the Messiah comes, remember the Old Testament Judaism is all about animal sacrifice. And all that animal sacrifice had to end when Rabbinic Judaism, actually when the temple was destroyed, and then Rabbinic Judaism tried to kind of rationalize it and come up with a substitute system. And so, of course, the rabbis were pulling out their hair asking, what about when the Messiah returns? When the Messiah returns, will the sacrifices dictated in the Old Testament resume? And they came up with the conclusion, well, after the Messiah comes, only one form of the Old Testament sacrifice will resume. Not the wave offering, not the sin offering, not the purification offering. The only sacrifice which will resume after the Messiah comes is the Thanksgiving offering, the Todah offering. What's Eucharist mean? Eucharist is simply Greek for Thanksgiving. So you see, the rabbis in the Talmud already say that after the cessation of sacrifice through the destruction of the temple, when the Messiah comes, the Thanksgiving, the Eucharist will resume. The true sacrifice will resume, but it will be the Thanksgiving offering. It will be the Eucharist. And I don't have the quotes in front of me, but they also say in the Talmud, they ask, will manna descend from heaven after the Messiah comes? Because the first deliverer, the first Redeemer, who was Moses, gave us manna from heaven. So when the second Redeemer, the real Redeemer, the Messiah comes, will he also give us manna from heaven? And they came to the conclusion that yes, there is no manna in the age between the first Redeemer, that is Moses, and the real Redeemer, who is the Messiah. But when the Messiah comes, he will cause the miraculous bread from heaven, manna, to descend once again, which of course we know is the Eucharist, and we know it is the Eucharist on the authority of no one less than Jesus himself, who in John 6, it's John 6, says, Moses gave your fathers manna in the wilderness, but they died nonetheless. I give you the true bread from heaven, my flesh to eat, and he who eats of my flesh will never die, but he who eats of my flesh and drinks my blood will have life everlasting, and I will raise him up on the last day. That's a paraphrase because I didn't have the quote in front of me, but it's in John 6. It's the bread of life discourse. So you see all these neat places where Judaism inadvertently collides with Christianity and comes out on the Christian side, so to speak, and confirms Christianity. I'm obviously very scatterbrained today. Thank you for bearing with me. Let me see how many of you. 83 are bearing with me now, so that's pretty good. So I think I may, because this whole show now has been close, I don't even know, what's it been, an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I'm hoarse. So let me see. I think what I'll do is the way I will have described this, this was part 1 and part 2 because of that little glitch. But I will say that what I've done up till now is basically talked about what is Judaism from the Garden of Eden until the Council of Jamnia, essentially, till the coming of Christ and the replacement of a sacrificial Judaism, Old Testament Judaism, Temple Judaism, with Rabbinic Judaism at the Council of Jamnia. And I will begin the next show. I can't get enough of these shows. I don't know about you guys, but I can't resist. I'm going to do the next of these shows day after tomorrow on Friday. Same time. I know I'm saturating you. I don't want to wait till Sunday. I was going to wait till Sunday, but I'm going to make it Friday. And I will do it on Judaism from the Council of Jamnia on. So in these few minutes that remain, let me use some of the slides that I did prepare successfully. Now, I know that you guys believe me, because otherwise you wouldn't be still watching. But let me show you some, give you some evidence of what I'm talking about, or some of the claims I made. So the first one I'm going to do is remember that I was so bold as to claim that Mount Moriah in the Old Testament and the Calvary in the New Testament are actually, that the mountains are the same mountain, that they are about a half a mile apart, less than a half a mile apart, more like I don't want to do the arithmetic, but less than a half a mile apart on the same mountain ridge. And so I have brought up a Google Maps aerial view of the old city of Jerusalem. And you will see that I've kind of made yellow circles. And the yellow circle on the right of your screen with a red arrow pointing down at it has, in very small letters that you probably can't read, Temple Mount. But that is the Temple Mount. You can see there's a broad plaza there. There are no people visible on it. It's like a large, looks from the satellite like a large cement plaza. It's actually, of course, stones. And you see the Dome of the Rock, which is tragically a mosque, and I will talk more about that. Maybe I won't be ending the show that soon if I start talking about that. But anyway, you see that there. And then if you go to the left of the screen, to the other yellow circle with the other arrow, you will see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre there. Okay? So I'm not making this up. It is actually, they are about 600 yards apart, 500 yards apart. And if you don't believe me that they're actually that close, because who can tell from the satellite that they're that close, here is the same Google Maps photo with a walking route. Now you can't go straight, obviously, nowadays because of the old city built up. But one of those walking routes is 650 meters, the other is 700 meters, and you can see that a direct line would be under 500 meters. So there you have the fact that they really are the same mountain ridge, the same mountaintop. Now, since I'm talking about this and I can never bring myself to stop talking, let me show you the, you can see, where do I have, I never have the pictures that I really want. So, okay, here's the picture that I really want. So I do have it. Now, here's another view that shows how close they are, which shows, this is probably a better view. This is probably the only view I had to show. But this is from the hillside of the Mount of Olives. And there you see the golden dome of the Temple, of the Temple Mount with the Mosque of Omar there. And then you see in the distance, I put a red circle around the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Those two gray domes there with the red circle around them, they are in fact the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So there you see that again, it's about 500 yards from one to the other. And now let's see if I know I can find it. Let me find another one. So that dome that you see in that one is closer up. You can see the way there are two domes, a smaller dome and a larger dome just behind it. And if we actually stand right across the street from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, this is what we'll see. We'll see, you see the cross on top, it's obviously Christian, and the large dome, I want to get this right. I believe the large dome is directly over the over Mount Calvary. But you know something? I'm going to say that in a soft voice because I'm confused at the moment about which dome is which. But in any case, the entire church is built right over Calvary, and of course, it's been expanded so it encompasses the garden of, the garden tomb, and so forth. And let me show what's inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, as long as I'm making this a little bit of a travelogue here. That dome is over the site of Calvary itself, where the crucifixion took place. Now that site is actually in the hands of the Eastern Orthodox, who like to cover everything with gold and silver and icons and adornments. And so this is actually the very spot where the cross was planted. That large cross is obviously just symbolic, but it's exactly where the cross was. And you can see the back of a woman who is kneeling down under an altar. And the reason she's kneeling down there is she's sticking her hand through a hole in the floor. And when you stick your hand through the hole in that floor, you can actually feel a chiseled out square in the stone, which was the chiseled out square to hold the foot of the cross. And so people wait there. Well, if they go in the early morning, they may not have to wait. There may be no one there, but otherwise they may have to wait in line to their turn to go up there on their knees and place their hand in the hole where the foot of the cross was. And we know that there was an earthquake, and the earth split on Mount Calvary. The rock split in two in that earthquake when Jesus died. And in fact, if you go down the stairs from there and in another little chapel directly under that spot where that woman is placing her hand, you will find this. And what is this? This is actually the crack in the rock that was produced by that earthquake. It's another little chapel to commemorate that crack in the rock. And it's a little bit hard to see, but at the top of that crack in the rock, there is a little measuring device that they placed there to keep tabs on that crack in the rock. So that's by way of saying, yes, the crucifixion really took place in that spot. And now to go now I'm going to get a little more Jewish and maybe a little chauvinist and so forth. But of course, it's very tragic that one of the holiest site in Judaism and one of the holiest sites in Christianity is now under Muslim control, and neither Jews nor Christians are allowed to pray there, literally. There have been times in the last 20 years when they have been allowed to pray there, but things get continually worse, and now they're not even allowed to enter the Dome of the Rock and see the stone on which Abraham sacrificed Isaac. And if they go up to Temple Mount, they're only allowed up there a couple of hours a week. I think Tuesday and Thursday mornings for an hour and a half, if there's no tension in the air. But they're not allowed to pray when they're walking on the pavement. Let me show you what it looks like now. I have been busted. I've been busted for silently praying, walking on the pavement. They descend on you and either manhandle you to the exit, or if you stop before they get to you, they might just give you a stern warning, but keep their eye on you. So if you do so, I'm not talking about praying getting down on your knees. I'm not talking about praying holding a rosary in your hand. I'm talking about praying simply looking like you're recollected. They descend on you. So this is the Dome of the Rock, and it is not only verboten, strikt verboten, and Judenfrei, that's German for Juden, free of Jews, which was a phrase that the Nazis used, and also free of Christians praying. But in fact, they have taken the opportunity, the Muslims have taken the opportunity, when they built that mosque, to adorn it with very interesting sayings. Okay, so let me go to the right. Okay, so you see that the mosque in the distance there, across the plaza, and let's zoom in, so to speak, on the writing, the decoration around the dome, and you'll see that's all Arabic writing. And it says the same verses over and over, broadcasting into the world around the dome. Now, I neglected to say, why is the Temple Plaza one of the holiest places in Christianity? I forgot to say, because Jesus spent all of Holy Week preaching in the porticos outside of the temple. So this plaza is where Jesus spent Holy Week. It's where he gave all of those wonderful parables and talks that precede the crucifixion from Monday of Holy Week until the Last Supper. He spent up here on Temple Mount. It's, of course, he overturned the tables of the money changers. He called the Pharisees a brood of vipers and so forth. He really actually verbally scourged the Jews more during that week than at any other time. And I do have several live streams up on YouTube. The Holy Week live streams are all about Jesus's preaching up here on the Temple Mount. And I used to love to go to the porticos where Jesus would have gathered with his disciples and given those talks, given those preachings all day. Anyway, and you used to be able to, but you're not allowed to now. So that's why it's a tragedy to Christians that they're not allowed access to the Temple Mount. But back to the inscription, not only are they not allowed access, but if they were up there, they would have to see very direct anti-Christian propaganda. Because in fact, let's look at the English translation of what that writing on the side of the dome is. So here we have some. It's all directed towards denying Christianity and denying Jesus. So let me read some of those texts that are up on your screen. Do not say anything but the truth about God. The Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, was only God's messenger. His word that he committed to Mary and a spirit proceeding from him. So believe in God and his messengers, but do not say three. Basically, Jesus was simply a prophet. He was simply God's messenger. Do not say three. It is a terrible thing to make up. As a matter of fact, the next one says, it is better for you, for God is only one God. Glory be to him that he should have a son. To him belongs all that is in the heavens and on the earth. God suffices for a guardian. So anyway, God certainly does not have a son. Peace be upon him, the day he was born, the day he dies, and the day he is raised up alive. That is Jesus, the son of Mary, in word of truth, about which they are doubting. It is not for God to take a son. Glory be to him. So obviously, God does not have a son. Jesus is not the son of God. He is not God. He is simply a servant and a messenger. And in fact, he's less of a messenger than Muhammad. So let's go to the next slide. This should have been the first slide. Around the octagonal structure is a long classical Arabic inscription. So here it is. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, there is no God but God alone, without partner. Say he is God, one, God the everlasting, who has not begotten and has not been begotten. He is without equal. Muhammad is God's messenger. May God bless him. How many times and how strongly can they say that Christianity is wrong, that Jesus is not the Son of God, is not God? He is a prophet inferior to Muhammad. And of course, they have to broadcast this. This is the whole, I don't want to say essence, but it's at the heart of Islam is that you have to proclaim your dominance over other religions. That's why they have that chant broadcast from loudspeakers from every mosque, at 4:30 in the morning, asserting the superiority of Islam. You have to be imperialist. You have to, basically, you can tolerate non-Muslims, but they must be subject to you, and they have to know that they are subject to you and inferior to you. There's a technical term for that in Islam, that's dhimmi. They have to be dhimmis, it's called dhimmitude, and they have to be subjected, and they have to be servants and serfs of Islam and Muslims, because in fact, Muslims ideally would not have to work. Their only job for Muslim men would be to wage jihad, to wage war, and they should be able to support themselves off of the slavery or servitude of non-Muslims. I'm getting off the talk a little bit off the topic, but it's true. And so they do this symbolically also by trying to build a mosque on Ground Zero in New York City, which fortunately did not take place, but that would have been a visual assertion of their superiority. Building the mosque on the Temple Mount is a visual assertion of their superiority over Judaism and Christianity. Putting these sayings denying Jesus on that very spot in big letters is a visible way of asserting their superiority, their sovereignty, and the second-class citizenship, and even worse, of non-Muslims. But let's get to some more of those sayings. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, there is no God but God alone, without partner. The next one, to God who has not taken a son and who does not have any partner in dominion, nor any protector out of humbleness, magnify him greatly. And again, there's no God but God alone, without partner, and on and on and on and on. So that was my little digression, my little travelogue digression, since I was showing the that very kind of beautiful visual image, I'll go back to it, of the proximity of the rock where Abraham sacrificed Isaac. Let's not think of it as the Dome of the Rock for the moment, but let's think of it as the site of the Jewish temple, which was built on the spot where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, which was the start of the Jewish people, the beginning of Judaism, the selection of the Jewish people out of all the nations on the earth to essentially, I don't want to say be messengers, but be vehicles for God's revelation to be spread throughout the world, and to be vehicles for the incarnation of God as man. And when that incarnation took place, it took place for the primary purpose, can I say, of God's himself, God's the second person of the Most Holy Trinity himself, to offer himself up a sacrifice on top of the very same mountain on Calvary, and therefore making a perfect, symmetric conclusion and fulfillment of the promise of Judaism in the realization of that promise in the Catholic Church and the sacraments. So what better place to end? So let me end there. Thank you for watching. Let us go to the opening screen, and I'll say goodbye for now.